So, hello everyone. This is the first of a series of conversations between the founder members of the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred, where we're going to explore between ourselves our interests, our passions, what has led us to want to begin this project and spread the word about what we're doing. So we thought it would be a wonderful idea if we had an informal conversations with each other and discussed what it is about the project that so inspires us, and to talk a bit personally about our lives and what has drawn us to want to combine our academic studies with something a bit deeper and perhaps more spiritual. So today I'm going to talk to my co-director, Louise Livingstone, and find out about her life and why she's involved in this project. So to begin with, would you like to tell us something about your interests as you were growing up, Louise, and what led you, what were the very first sort of indications of leading you into the place you are now?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'd love to. Growing up, I had a great affinity with the land and stones. I remember that my parents would take us on holiday down to the furthest southwest point of Cornwall, to the Penwith Peninsula, and I just remember seeing these standing stones, just these incredible monoliths looming out of the mists that often shrouded the peninsula, and it was magic. It was sheer magic. And so I think I must have been about 5-6 years old when we started to sort of go on down there for holidays, and I was just captivated, absolutely captivated. And I just recall the land speaking to me and the stones speaking to me. And when I say speaking to me, not like you and I are talking to each other now, but it was more a sense of knowing that I was connected to something much greater than myself, and that these beings, these stone monoliths that have been placed there sort of thousands and thousands of years ago by my ancient ancestors, have been placed there purposefully and for ceremony. And so for me, it just ignited this fire in my heart for myths, mystery, megaliths, sacred sites, which I guess I've carried throughout my entire life. So, and then I would just gobble up information about Egypt. I got really interested in Egypt, Tutankhamun's tomb, mysteries, things that couldn't be explained. So I guess really I've carried this interest and this passion deep in my heart from a very, very young age.
So did you feel that you were connecting with some ancestral spirit in some way?
If I think back to what was happening, yes. I also feel that I was connecting to the earth in some way, to a greater force that was sort of animating not just the earth, but me too, as somebody who was deeply connected to the energies of the land, particularly that I felt when I was down in Cornwall. I didn't feel it quite so much when I would come back home to where I lived in the Midlands, although, there was a sort of faint sense of that. But it was really palpable for me when I was down in Cornwall. So yes, I felt like the ancestors were reaching out, but also that the land, Gaia maybe, was reaching out to me to speak to me and to show me what it was to be a human being, having an authentic, genuine experience of being a human being.
So that was when you were really quite young?
Yeah, very young.
So how did that develop sort of during your teenage years?
Well, I can't say it did. I would, I still retained my interest in visiting sacred sites, and I discovered crystals. So I just remember people bringing stones to me. I always used to have a stone in my pocket or a crystal in my pocket. I don't really know why. It was just they seemed to just radiate towards me. And I think as I grew older and, you know, sort of went through the education system, then I forgot about those experiences that I had. I wasn't so connected to nature. And I sort of remember when I was doing my options, I was thinking, I'd really like to do archaeology as a degree. And then I just remember thinking, I read the prospectus when I was looking at universities to go to, and they didn't say anything about, you know, there was nothing there that said anything about myth or mystery or the experience of the ancients. And I thought, well, I don't want to do anything like that then. It just seemed very dry to me. So I just went off and did a marketing and business degree, as you do. So yeah, I think those passions, that experience that I had growing up, it was quite dampened down, really.
So how did you then return to them?
Well, probably as many people know, because I talk about this in my thesis and quite a lot, because it's the framework really for the work that I'm now doing. But I've had ongoing cardiac problems since the age of 18. And I suppose what I feel now, looking back over the last 20 odd, 30 years, is that I feel that there was something always calling me back to a sort of more expanded way of knowing, that actually my whole outlook had become so narrow, so literal, that all the joy had gone from my life, really. And so what I feel my heart was trying to do through the virus that I had and through the ongoing complications that I had was to sort of bring me back to a more expanded space of awareness that I knew, and that was part of my DNA, part of my birthright when I was growing up, but that I had turned my attention away from. I don't even feel that I'd forgotten it, because as soon as you turn your antenna back towards these ways of knowing, then there's a remembrance. There's the cellular remembrance. So it was my heart, I feel, when I was 18, when I had my first episode and had a near-death experience, that started to bring me back to a sense that, Louise, you need to turn your attention back towards the human experience. There are more expanded ways of knowing, and how you're living is not healthy. So that was really the call back for me.
It's interesting how often illness or accidents, you know, can be read in that way, isn't it? How they really are signs that we're moving in the wrong direction. And
yeah. Although I suppose
to lifestyles that are just not what we actually chose in some way.
Hugely. And I think, you know, that was the first call when I was 18, but then I sort of went on for another 15 years not really taking much notice. I knew that there was something there in the background, because, you know, the condition that I had required that I had a pacemaker, that I would be going to hospital every 6 months, and I'd be on huge amounts of medication, but I was still kind of still in the narrow version of reality, if you like. And it wasn't until the mid-2000s, when I was going through an extremely difficult time, when I was having atrial fibrillation, you know, further complications from the virus that I'd had all those years earlier, that then something really reached out to me and said, you cannot continue like this. You will not be here if you continue like this. And there are things that you need to do. You're here for a purpose. And that was when I really felt that visceral sense of, I can't carry on like this. I need to turn back towards what it was that I turned away from all those years ago, and to bring this back into my life in whatever way I can.
So what led you to bringing it back in an academic sense? Why did you choose to enter the academic world?
Well, so I guess the study really started after when that something reached out to me in the middle of the night. My heart reached out to me and said, you know, stop this conflict is your own making. you have the opportunity to change it. I actually signed up on a course to learn how to become a crystal therapist, because that was the thing that reached out to me. I saw this course being advertised, and I thought, I really want to do that. It was just a real soul pull. It was a sense that I had to do this particular course. And I also trained in Reiki at the same time. So I went through quite quickly from Reiki 1 all the way through to Reiki Master. So I was actually using my crystal therapy qualification with my Reiki Master qualification. And I just found all these incredible things happening, things I couldn't explain, sensations in my body, knowing things that I couldn't normally know, because I'd opened something. I'd opened the door back up, if very slowly and sort of to a crack, but I'd opened a door back on a world that I'd left behind all those years ago. So it started with Reiki, crystal therapy. It then moved on to a real deep sense of knowing that I had to go to the Schumacher College in Devon to do the Masters in Holistic Science.
So what was this sense that you somehow needed to ground it in an academic study? Why was that, do you think? Why wasn't it enough to just carry on practicing?
Because again, I knew, I can't explain this, but it was a real deep visceral sense that although I'd been doing the crystal therapy and the Reiki, that it was important for me to ground what I was learning in some kind of academic framework, so that because it felt that in the future I would be working to support people, in times of great challenge and chaos, but I didn't know what that was going to be. So it wasn't enough for me just to say, oh, well, a crystal does this because Reiki does this, because I needed to have a sort of deeper, wider framework. And because I hold, the scientific method and science in such a high regard, and obviously it was the soundtrack to my education. The empirical method and that way of being in the world was a soundtrack to my education, and I knew that there was always something that was missing from that method that could still be incorporated into the empirical method, but just help to help science and whatever it was looking at become more enchanted and more enlivened. And so I saw this course at Schumacher and I thought, oh my goodness, that's saying exactly what it is that I'm wanting to explore. Because again, they were saying as part of the course, it's not enough to just have science and the empirical method and abstraction and quantity. We also, how are we able to have a science with quality, with experience? Is that possible? And for me, it was like, well, if they're asking that question, then that's where I want to go, because I want to see if it's possible.
Yeah.
And it was.
Schumacher is an extraordinary place in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah.
It offers are so holistic and.
Yeah.
So when you left Schumacher, what did you feel you gained from that experience?
I feel that I had been plugged back into the world again. It was like I was switched back on as a human being, having a human experience in a world that made more sense to me. And so obviously, yes, there was still great mystery and we still can't explain everything. But the idea that I could meet a plant in its living environment in the beautiful gardens of Dartington and the Schumacher College without having to pull it up from its roots and kill it and dissect it into pieces, but I could actually have a living conversation in the gardens with a plant or a tree and learn from that plant or tree whilst it was living in its own environment. It was an incredible experience because it was a flipping of what I knew to be true about the scientific method. And to understand that you can also learn about a tree and also learn about yourself whilst in conversation with that living being, and also learn about the world at the same time in a scientific way, It was a revelation for me. So that was what I came back out with, and the world was enlivened for me.
So was this through using the method of Gertie and Inquiry?
Yeah.
At
Yeah. So we were introduced to Gertie and Inquiry within the first week that I was there, the first week of the course. And it was it was so difficult for me to do this practice. And I spent the first 5 days just staring at this plant that we were supposed to be engaging with. Nothing was happening at all. Nothing. And I had this little groundsel that was in this groundsel plant. It was actually called, it's known as a weed, but I see it as a sort of beautiful being. I can't call this plant a weed. And she was just sat there in a sort of perfect part of the courtyard. She, you know, had enough rain, enough sun to keep her alive. And in one amazing moment, after about the 5th day, I was just sitting there saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm here, having a proper crisis of faith, really. And then I just had this expansiveness of my mind, my heart, my soul. And I saw this being in her environment, living, breathing, being nourished by the soil in a perfect place with the perfect amount of sun, the perfect amount of rain. And she was living because of the environment within which she had chosen to grow in. And it was revelatory for me. And it doesn't sound like much when I'm talking about it, but I just felt my whole mind, heart, soul expand. And I knew I was part of something greater. And then everything just came alive with this kind of shimmering energy because of that one experience.
So while you were studying, were you carrying on your practice with crystals and Reiki and so on?
Yes, I was known as the stone whisperer in the college. So people would come to me and you know, sort of share things with me, and I'd be like, oh, I've got a crystal for that. So I'd go to my sort of box of crystals and give them a crystal or a stone. And if somebody had gone off to you know, a sacred site on Dartmoor or something, they would bring me back a stone so I could, you know, sit and commune with a stone. I was also doing Reiki as well, probably weekly Reiki treatments. So it was just wonderful to be able to work with crystals, commune with stones, do my Reiki with other students, go out onto the land. We had a whole day where we went out onto Dartmoor and created a whole ceremony out of it. So I took my drum and drummed to the land. We sang songs to the land, read poetry to the land. Oh, it was just absolutely beautiful whilst we were learning about Gertie and Inquiry and how the landscape of Dartmoor had been formed.
Sounds completely idyllic, Louise.
It was incredible, and you know, and it was all in a scientific framework, but it was about the actual experience of being human within the land, and that was how we did science. It was all experiential.
So then after Schumacher, you felt moved to want to carry on your studies. Why did you feel you wanted to subject yourself to 5 or 6 years of further study with the kind of PhD's journey?
Yeah, well, my thesis, my master's dissertation had been on exploring the phenomena of conflict. And I wanted to understand conflict more, this idea of why do we live in such a polarized world, this either or reality. And I think as I grew more in my own spirituality and the methodology of the science that was practiced at the Schumacher College, it became increasingly clear to me that it was the edges, it was these kind of shimmering edges, or the sort of grey middle, that was where the creativity was, where the mystery was, and where the real treasure was. And so I just felt, after I'd done my master's dissertation, that I hadn't quite reached where I wanted to reach. There was still something unfinished. And that was when I think I reached out to you, Angela, and started to just explore what I could possibly do with you at Canterbury Christchurch. And I was amazed at what you were doing with the MA. And I think we had a very long conversation, and it became clear to me that there was so much more that I could explore with this idea of conflict and what it means, and what framework could it be explored in. And it was my heart also saying to me, you know, Louise, you really, really have not finished yet. There is more for you to do, and we have more work to do together. Although at the time I hadn't realised how central a part my heart would play in the PhD. So then it was a case of just, again, following my intuition, following my heart, following your encouragement, filling in the application, and then getting accepted, and getting the scholarship, and then just being able to sort of immerse myself so fully in the MA, your guidance, and all the rest of the team. And that was what brought me to Canterbury.
So I suppose it was a bit like kind of bringing in a whole new dimension to the scientific.
Yeah.
In the sense that we were focusing very much on the imaginal.
Yeah. Yes, because obviously whilst the Imaginal was sort of a large part of the inquiry that we undertook at Schumacher, because Gertie and Inquiry is in essence, it's an imaginal inquiry. But I really felt that there were deeper spaces to go to. There was a deeper narrative that needed to come to the surface. And as I started on the PhD journey at Canterbury, I realised that actually it was the voice of the heart as the organ of the imagination. Yes. that was the platform that wanted to speak its voice and its truth about conflict and about maybe some of the challenges and the situations that we find ourselves in our modern world in 2020.
Yes. And I guess you discovered writers and authors who had come from that perspective themselves, like Corban, James Hillman, and
I mean, it was really beautiful to discover. I knew about Jung because on my master's dissertation, I was looking at, the sort of the union of opposites, the idea of the, transcendent function, and the idea of individuation. But what I felt needed more exploration, particularly through my own heart, was, the beautiful way that Henri Corbin talks about the heart as the organ of the imagination that connects the the world of the abstract with the divine, the mystical. And there was something about that really pulled me, because throughout the whole of my life I just feel that there was a deeper mystery, a deeper sense of something greater than me that one could call divine. In a sense, I'm still holding on to this sense that I'm not willing to let that go. It can't be proven, but I'm not willing to let that go. And I don't feel it needs to be proved, because it's enough to experience. So that's a framework that drew me, a narrative that drew me, as well as James Hillman's work, who was he himself was so deeply inspired by Corbin when he wrote about the heart being an organ of the imagination. And that actually the world presents itself to us as living, experiencing beings through the organ of the imagination, which is the heart, through the images that the world presents to us. And in communion with the world, we speak through our hearts to the world. And it's just so beautiful. And it just felt to be so true to me, to my experience, because it took me right back to Cornwall. Because I knew then that, from what Corbin and Hillman were saying was, yes, that's how the world talks to me. And that was how it was always talking to me. So no wonder my heart was kind of screaming out to me all those years to say, come back to me, come back to the heart, come back to the world, come back to the experience of life.
So you were actually trying to do something which really was a bringing together of the opposites.
Yeah.
Bringing the voice of the heart into the quite strict kind of protocol and expectations of a PhD format. How did you feel that conflict, that particular conflict worked for you? I mean, having achieved it, that is, an incredible success, but actually doing it must have felt quite a struggle.
It was, yeah, it was. I mean, it was a constant, it was a constant struggle. I think, as probably you could vouch for me, Angela, you know, there were times where I was not in a good place at all, you know, because there was it felt like I was caught. I was, being ripped apart in two worlds. And I think that's a challenge that we carry as human beings. I'm not saying that it's something that I have managed to comfortably bring together. It's a challenge on a daily basis, and I'm constantly moving between these two different worlds. But I find that the framework of the heart, the voice of the heart, the abilities, the capabilities, and the wisdom of the heart, and how it receives the images from the world, helps me to navigate that difficulty in a sort of more comfortable way, a more effective way. Because that conflict is always going to be there. That's what I learned.
Yes.
Because we are the conflict. We embody that
we embody our left and right brain hemispheres, don't we?
As human beings, we embody that. We are that. We are the conflict. And so it took me right back to those words that my heart said, you know, you are the conflict, but you have the chance to change this and to do something with it. And so for me, holding that in my heart space is completely right. Yes, I hold that. But this is the place where one can most, for me anyway, where I find I can most easily hold those opposites, that challenge, that conflict, that chaos, and make meaning from it.
Would you like to just tell people the title of your thesis?
Yes, it's how can the thought of the heart offer more effective ways of engaging with conflict, an imaginal and reflective study. And that word effective was really important because, you know, it's not solved.
No.
This is never solved. And if we think about Jung, he says that as well, this is never solved. It's constant work.
Well, it's a human condition, as you say. I mean, it almost seems like that we're put here for a sort of learning experience to try and move as far as possible towards resolving these conflicts in whatever way. Like he would say, you know, the individuation process is something about getting to know one's conflicts and managing them in a more sort of harmonious way. But are you hoping to publish your thesis?
I'd like to, yeah. I mean, I've had a chat with a couple of people who've said that they could potentially be interested. I'd like to bring it into a more grounded form because I think the message that the heart has to give is extremely important. And the reason why I think I forged ahead, one of my questions by one of my examiners was, you know, why didn't you just choose to write a book, write a memoir about your experience? And I was expecting that question because I knew it was deeply important, and I'd wrestled with it throughout the whole of my PhD. But it was a sense that we have to give voice to the heart, because in our modern world, the heart is just seen as something that is sentimental. It's just an add-on. It's seen from the point of view of the mind, from the rational mind. And so therefore, it can only be seen from a narrow point of view. And first and foremost, from that point of view, it's a biological organ. And it is, you know, yes, it is. But it's so much more than that. And so my thesis was written as a plea from the heart to say, I am equally a physical organ, but I am equally an organ of wisdom, the place where the world speak to us, and I receive that and pass that wisdom to the brain, to the mind, to the rational, to make sense of. And I work in communion with every other part of the body. And if I am seen as sentimental or, oh, just that organ that deals with love, but that's irrational, then how are we ever going to lift that dialogue to a place of equality for us to even consider what the heart has to say? And that was the whole thrust of my thesis. And it had to be in a thesis, because that's where we change narrative. At the level of research, that's where we change narrative. Well, and so while it might seem like a simple message,
maybe try and find a kind of synthesis between the critical mind and the heart.
But if the heart is still continued to be seen from a scientific narrative, we have to lift the heart up to be its own organ in its own right, with its own wisdom and its own ways of seeing, that has just as much validity as the rational cognitive mind.
Yeah.
And bring them together, and then what conversations could we have if they were on the same level? And that was the whole thrust and purpose of my work. And it still is, because I still have to keep driving this message home, that where are we viewing the heart from and its ideas? Are we seeing it from the rational mind, or are we actually seeing it from the heart itself, from that place? Because it requires a shift. It requires a shift down and into the body. It's a flip, to use Jeff Kripal's terminology.
So then, of course, we have to find a way of speaking about it and articulating it.
Exactly.
And I think it's very hard to speak from both the heart and the head. You know, it's very difficult, particularly if we're involved in the academic world. And this is partly what our project is about, isn't it? Is how do you honour speaking from the heart in such a way that is also, you know, deeply scholarly, maybe also has a critical edge, can engage in debates, also, you know, it's always coming back to that sort of compassionate centre.
Exactly.
It's quite a challenge.
It is a challenge, and the framework that I chose was sort of delivered to me by the heart itself, which was the heart first of all receives the images, you know, say through dream or reverie or intuition. And I would have my heart speaking to me in those ways at the beginning of each of my chapters. And that was then the jumping off point to move into the scholarly, the critical, the academic, to make sense of the dream through or the meditation or the intuition or the visualization, to make sense of that and to make meaning from that in a kind of rational, cognitive way. That was important. But the meaning that I got from doing it that way round transformed me in the process and gave me a wider view of reality. And then that information was passed back to the heart to pass back out to the world. And so each time I was building on each chapter, each meditation, each reverie, I was building on the information given to me. And so in the end, my mind, my heart, my whole body were working in a kind of union, in a synergy, to give me a more expansive view of the world itself.
So you were putting into practice what Irma Gilchrist talks about, of moving from the kind of intuitive perception of the right hemisphere through to the analysis of the left, and then taking it back again to the right.
Exactly.
And that's what your thesis was about.
Yeah, completely. Trying to bring these worlds together and exploring what meaning that made. Being amazed at the expansiveness of what was actually allowed to come into my awareness because of that. And also seeing how that not only transformed my own life, but how that could move forward into the world and transform the lives of others through a particular way of being and seeing in the world.
Which we need more than ever right now, of course.
Yeah, and that's what I see my, you know, ongoing work as being, you know, with the centre, with Myth Cosmology Sacred, working with you, doing my own works with the Heart Sense Research Centre, is sort of bringing this work now into a wider context, supporting other people who maybe are feeling that the ways that they are being in the world are limited, are unsatisfactory for the problems that we are facing, and to have these more expansive creative conversations. I'm not saying I have the answer, I don't think any of us do, but to be able to move into a space where we can have the invitation and the permission to have wider conversations, more creative conversations. My interest now is, where do those conversations lead us? Where could they take us as we, you know, evolve and grow?
Yeah, so I was going to ask you, you know, how do you see the work of the centre carrying this forward, and what are your visions for the future in that sense?
Yeah, so my hope for the centre is that we are sort of on the forefront of supporting others to maybe question the way that they've learned to be and know the world, and perhaps through these frameworks that we offer and ways of seeing that we offer, might be able to sort of come to know greater meaning and depth in their own lives, more expansiveness in their own lives. So that's my hope and vision, really.
And would you like to say something about your wonderful project with stones?
Oh yes, I would love to. And also I should really go and grab one. Can you just
Yes.
bear with me 2 seconds? Let me go
Yeah.
and grab one. Hello. Right, so yes, I've started creating sacred sites and sacred stones.
Wow.
So this is a dolmen. So based on what I used to go and visit in the southwest peninsula, Cornwall. So yes, this is one of my little projects. So you can find those on my website, www.heartsenseresearch.co.uk/living-stones. So yeah, that's one. And I've also made a very large stone circle. I don't know whether you can see that.
Stunning, Louise.
With a standing stone in the middle. So the purpose really is to sort of for people to have these and to bring the sacred back into people's lives, because I just think we're so starved of, you know, these beautiful ancient sacred spaces, and I know that they had such a profound effect on me when I go and visit them. So what I try and do is bring my Reiki into each creation. I put crystal energy in there, you know, just sort of universal life force energy, to bring the sacred and a sense of reverence back into people's lives.
So do you think we're moving into a completely new age now, where this rather kind of enlightenment kind of division between our practice, our making, our creativity, our spiritual lives, and our academic work there's no longer a need for separation?
Yeah, I absolutely see that. You know, there is no separation for me between my academic scholarly work and who I am as a human being having or sort of as a spiritual being having a human experience. There's no separation at all for me. The two live very comfortably alongside each other. They didn't for a while, but no, there's absolutely no separation for me at all.
So you don't see what you do in as any way kind of esoteric, or kind of something that's, you know, part of a kind of a practice that needs to be kept apart from perhaps the more sort of shared forum of academia?
Not for me personally. I mean, I think that there are others that I know who feel that way, and I deeply respect that. But for me, I see myself as a spiritual being having a human experience and trying to find a narrative and a framework that makes sense in this world, to bring the two worlds together. And that's always been my job. And I don't think that should be hidden from anybody, in my own personal experience, because I feel it's our birthright, and why we're here. So yes, everything goes for me. And if we can bring those things together with humility, I think, again, with a sense of the sacred, with humility, with all those qualities that the heart embodies and symbolizes, then I'm not saying it's a free-for-all. I'm saying we carry a responsibility to bring these two worlds together within the human experience, and that comes with responsibility.
Well, it's a kind of depth, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I'm very fond of what Jeffrey Kripal says about, you know, as you were saying, making that flip between the kind of deep, mysterious, ineffable experience that lies somewhere out there that we all glimpse through our different modes and our different forms of spiritual practice.
Yeah.
And the actual forms that we use, you know, that there is a kind of window that we can go through, and we don't actually have to keep that window firmly shut. But we can actually move backwards and forwards and
I agree.
find ways to connect the two worlds.
Yeah. And for me, that connection is the heart, and it,
Yeah.
you know, it always has been, and that's my narrative, and it might not be for everybody, but that's what's helped me to navigate, you know, this world, these times, these challenges, in a sort of humble, responsible, considered way. And I'm learning every day. I'm, as I said before, I'm not there, and this is constant learning through the wisdom of my own heart. But it's what makes sense to me as an experiencing human being in a dynamic, alive, ensouled, incredibly mysterious and beautiful world.
Well, that's beautiful, beautiful note to end on, Professor Louise. And
Yeah.
I'd just like to say how wonderful it is to have you as a colleague in this new project.
Oh, thank you.
And I feel that it can go a long way.
Yeah.
And that we are all joined in this, I guess, dedication of, you know, bringing the opposites together and bringing the two worlds together, and see where it takes us.
Absolutely. And, you know, likewise, it's a pleasure working on this project with you, Angela, as it has been working with you, you know, over the past 4 or 5 years with my PhD. So look forward to where this takes us.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks ever so much, Louise.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.